Hello once again and welcome back. Today I wanted to do a follow-up on Dune 7. As you can see, I'm about halfway through. I think I'm a little over. Yeah, I'm about 300 pages in. So I'm on page 294 of Sandworms of Dune. I've read Hunters. This is effectively Dune 7, okay? Frank Herbert died, in case you don't know, after writing 6 Dune books and left the series incomplete. And the story goes is that years later, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson discovered the notes and outline for Dune 7, Frank Herbert's proposed novel, on a couple of floppy disks that were locked in a safety deposit box in Seattle. We don't know how many notes were found and what was on them, but I wanted to talk about some of these alleged notes. Now, this is a big controversy. Okay, the controversy surrounding this, and this is what splits the fan community, is these Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson books. About half the fan base loves them, loves their books, really likes them, and about half the fan base despises these books. And there's a lot of people that are somewhere in the middle. Well, I'm not in the middle. I don't do anything halfway. I am absolutely hating these. This is just getting worse and worse as it goes along. And I'll have a full review on like everything wrong with this once it's done. But they say they're working. If you read, for instance, in the front of these books, it says right here, based on an outline by Frank Herbert. And I'm calling bullcrap on that. The other thing you'll notice is that in the front of these books is an advertisement for Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's trilogy, their Machine trilogy, okay, or whatever this is, the Butlerian Jihad, the Machine Crusade, and the Battle of Corran. So it's not in Hunters, but it's definitely in the front of Sandworms. So there's an advertisement, because really, you have to read those 3 books because they insert all kinds of characters from their own books into these. Serena Butler. I'm like, and there's a passage about some Cymex or something, and I was like, what? What? I don't. It's very confusing because they're inserting all these characters from their Butlerian Jihad trilogy into these novels, and if you haven't read those books, you're like, what is going on here? So one of these characters is Norma Sinba. Norma Sinba is terrible. So are these in Frank Herbert's notes? What about these notes? How many notes were there? I'm going to read something from this. It says, if you do a Google search, this comes from, let's see, the almost undeleted is what this is called, the alleged Dune 7 notes. I'm scrolling down. There's a picture of the floppy disk here. But we'll read some of this relevant information. There's quite a bit of documented quotations from Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. But I think my wife is yelling at my kids downstairs, and I'm sorry. It is what it is. You're just going to have to deal with this. But the problem that we have, I think the most useful thing we're going to have is the audiobook interview for, I'm trying to find out. This was in the Hunters of Dune audiobook from 2006. Okay, this was Scott Brick, who does a lot of the narration when he records the audiobooks. Okay, on that audiobook, there was an interview that Scott Brick conducted with Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert. And it says here, he asks him, how many notes are there? It says, yeah, it's just, this is Brian Herbert. Yeah, it's just a 3-page or maybe 2.5-page outline, but it's concise. we've added a lot to it. I mean, it was more of an inspiration for us and kind of a general concept than a detailed scene by scene outline. So Kevin and I have fleshed out the characters and scenes, and I think a few weeks later I started rummaging around in my storage, and I found additional general Dune notes of my father's that have really helped us too. So it was kind of amazing to have these things appear right after Kevin and I met. And then Scott Brick says, so you all had started making plans, and then essentially you found a roadmap. And then it says Kevin and Jay Anderson and Brian Herbert talk over each other. Then Brian Herbert says this: well, I wouldn't say we found a roadmap. I'd say we found clues. Scott Brick says, okay. Brian Herbert says, it's been more clues than precise roadmaps. So then Scott Brick follows up. Scott Brick says, I was curious because you had written about this in The Road to Dune, about having found this. I was always curious how detailed an outline it was and how much room it gave you for improvisation, shall we say. Kevin J. Anderson, it says, takes a breath. Brian Herbert answers ahead of him. No, it wasn't that detailed. It was more general. Scott Brick, got it. And then Kevin J. Anderson interrupts and says, but it has answered the question that we need to have answered. I mean, there's always some big mysteries that's left at the end of Chapter House. Dune and Frank Herbert could say more in a sentence than some people can say in chapters, so we were able to find what we had to do in order to write the rest of the story. And in fact, it was such a huge story that it was kind of sketched out in this outline that it took us either one 1,500-page book to tell it, or two much smaller 700-page books. So that's why Hunters of Dune is the first half of the grand climax. Scott Brick, right. Now this is just an excerpt from the interview. So I want to find the full interview and read some really damaging information. Okay, I will try to link this interview that I found here in the description box if you want to find it for yourself. This is a transcript that I found online of the 2006 Hunters of Dune interview. It was conducted with Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson by Scott Brick. Somebody has transcribed it for us, and here is the part I wanted to talk about. It is, let's see, Scott Brick. Scott Brick says here, I'd like to talk about a few details of the book, but before I do, I'd like to make, I guess you call it a spoiler warning. I want to let everyone listening know that I was going to talk about some of the events at the end of Hunters. The interview is going to be placed at the end of the recording, so the assumption is everyone will already know about these things, but just in case someone listening doesn't already know what happens at the end of the book, I want to give the opportunity to hit pause now. Kevin J. Anderson says, run away. So this is the spoilery part of the book. So if you've read Chapter House Dune, at the end of Chapter House Dune, there are a couple of characters that are revealed there. Their identities are revealed there. A couple of characters named Danielle and Marty. And it was pretty specific. Frank Herbert spells out exactly what these characters are. And Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson retcon it at the end of Hunters of Dune and change their identities to a couple of characters. They insert characters from their own novels, okay, from this series here. This is the big spoiler. From this series that Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert, the Butlerian Jihad series, totally their own invention. They have a couple of characters from those books that are revealed to be the big bad of the end of Frank Herbert's series. So, I mean, this is egregious to me. I don't believe at all that Omnius and Erasmus, these robots, okay, these machine minds, are the real villains that Frank intended. So it says here, Scott Brick. So he says, exactly. In the last few chapters of the book, the old man and woman are revealed. I know that fans of your most recent Dune prequel trilogy, beginning with the Butlerian Jihad, they're finally going to get to see two of their absolute favorite characters return, which is cause for great rejoicing. Omnius and Erasmus really serve as a bridge between the two eras, you know, the Butlerian Jihad and the current timeline. I was wondering if you could tell us how that came about. At what point did you realize that those two couples, these essentially four characters, were indeed two characters, that they were the same? And here's Brian Herbert saying, well, this is where Omnius and Erasmus are actually characters that Kevin and I created. And they were not based on any notes that we found of Frank Herbert's at all. But we combined these two characters that we created, these are concepts. It was a story concept that we threaded in, knowing we were headed for Hunters of Dune and Sandworms. We combined what we added, our own concept, to Frank's overview and Frank Herbert's overview. Then is where we immersed these two characters. And then Kevin J. Anderson says, now I don't know about you, but that's pretty damning. You can't make the claim that these are based on Frank Herbert's notes if you created your own characters in your own series and then impose them into Frank Herbert's ending. It's no longer Frank Herbert's ending. You have altered his original intent and shoehorned in characters from your own books and changed their identities. Because, again, spoilers if you've read Chapter House. Daniel and Marty, it's pretty explicit, are face dancers. They're some sort of modified super face dancers, but they're face dancers. And Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert say, no, they're not face dancers at all. They're these robots from the Butlerian Jihad that have survived, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they're the big bad at the end of this series that everybody has to fight against. That is ridiculous. So I guess that's all I've got to say. If you want to read the rest of this, I'm not going to go into it, but Kevin J. Anderson goes on. They tried to defend this. And this interview with Scott Brick from the 2006 recording, I'll see if I can actually find an audio of this and link it, but I'll link the transcript below. These guys, this is a hack job. I mean, you might like these books, and I'm going to finish reading it, but this is just getting dumber and dumber as it goes along. We have sea worms now. Yeah, they genetically modified sandworms to create worms that live in the ocean. That's why on the front cover here, I mean, and they've got ultra spice. It's spicier than the regular spice. We've got ultra spice. This godlike character that the guild people, basically she's their god, called the Oracle of Time. Like, none of that, Frank Herbert made that up? No. That's ridiculous. So that's all I have to say for today. I will have a final review on this, but I wanted to put this out there and say these guys are frauds. And Brian Herbert, you should be ashamed of yourself. I mean, I think Kevin J. Anderson is just a total shill who will, you know, just publish books. You know, he's a gun for hire. Okay, he'll write Star Trek, Star Wars, you know, whatever he wants to write for money. I don't think that he's a real artist when it comes to art, and it's unfortunate because I don't really blame Brian Herbert so much. I wish Brian would have maybe been more selective in who he chose to work with these notes. This is just, how many Dune books are we up to now that these guys have written? There were only 6 Frank Herbert books, and I think they pretty much turned out like a book a year since then. So we've got House of Trees, House Harkonnen, House Carino. That's a prequel trilogy. The Butlerian Jihad, The Machine Crusade, The Battle of Corin. That's a sequel prequel trilogy. Hunters of Dune, Sandworms of Dune, which are these two books. Then we've got Paul of Dune, Winds of Dune, Sisterhood of Dune. Sisterhood of Dune is the new HBO series Prophecy. Dune Prophecy is based on Sisterhood of Dune. Then we've got Mentats of Dune, Navigators of Dune. This is another prequel trilogy. Then we've got Tales of Dune, Dune the Duke of Caladan, Dune the Lady of Caladan, Dune the Heir of Caladan, Sands of Dune. I know they just came out with another book called The Princess of Dune. I mean, it's just never going to stop. They're going to be writing Dune books until the end of time, and I'm not reading anymore. I'm going to finish this, and this will be the only 2 Dune books I read, and I'll get into tearing this apart. If I can stomach finishing it, because it's going downhill. It ought to be called Golas of Dune. It's ridiculous. All right. Again, I'll link the interview, this audio interview below. I'll try to find the audio and link it in the comments description. But thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.